And I think of the many interesting things about that film is that you embarked on this film as a process film. You met John because he scored The First Wave for you, which is Matt's film about the COVID crisis at a hospital in Long Island. And then John started talking to you about this American Symphony he was going to create, and you thought, that sounds like a great film, right?
Yeah, so John did the score for The First Wave, and we were having dinner afterwards, and he was telling me about the next year of his life and this residency at Carnegie Hall. And we both sort of turned to each other. We should probably film this. And life intervened. He got nominated for 11 Grammys. Suleika got re-diagnosed with cancer. Right. And so before we'd even started filming, the lens had already shifted.
So in a way, you're suddenly making almost 3 films, in my observation. There's the film about the making of the symphony. There's the story of Suleika's journey through cancer. And then there's your journey about shifting your film into something else, that you have to sort of respond to the circumstances, as every good verite documentary filmmaker must do, and figure out what your film is as you're shooting, right? So one of my questions is, the film is incredibly intimate. I mean, not just the scenes with Suleika, but also with John and his responses to talking to his therapist, these incredibly tight images of him, especially when he is starting to play the piano at that moment and he dedicates it to Suleika, and your camera's right there. And I saw an interview with him where he said, oh my God, Matt was everywhere. I would look up and there'd be Matt, and he'd be right in my face with a camera. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you find that amazing intimacy. I mean, it's different. You're in a war, you're in retrograde. People are really distracted by whether or not they're gonna die today. But you're filming someone who's in a very, very personal, intimate moment, including Suleika. So how did you get so close to achieve those scenes?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of filmmakers in the audience, and obviously, you know how it's done as well. For me, it's just all about trust. It's building trust, gaining trust, maintaining trust, and not ever taking it for granted. Continuing to sort of metaphorically renew your vows often. And we were filming in the range of 12 to 18 hours a day, every single day for 7 to 8 months. So I think we had 1,500 hours of footage.
Yeah, I did the math. That's 62 full days of shooting, 24 hours every day.
Not 24 hours, but yeah, a lot of hours.
Well, that's what 62 days comes to.
Sorry.
Yeah, 62 straight days of shooting is 24 divided by 15.
You're better at math than I am.
No, I have a calculator.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think my goal always is to become part of the fabric of the daily lives of those who I'm filming with, so that you can get those vulnerable moments, those human moments, those moments of revelation. And you can't do that if you have you're shooting on a call sheet from 12 to 6 and hoping you get something. I mean, these are fishing expeditions to some degree. And it's not as if I'm filming or we're filming without intention. But it allows you to get those moments in bed with them, in the hospital with them. They're so used to the camera being around. But it wasn't easy. I mean, John, despite being the band leader of the Colbert Show, despite being in front of the camera for a large portion of his life, was, it took a while for him to get used to this type of filmmaking. And Suleika, at first didn't want to be part of the film at all. She didn't want to be the sick antidote to John's success. She didn't want to be the sick wife in this story. As a amazing storyteller herself, she could see how in someone else's hands it could have become that. And so it took a lot of, just conversations and dialogue to make her feel comfortable to even allow me to start filming. Because no rational human being would really want a camera in their face as they're going through a bone marrow transplant, as their life is on the line. And for all of us, it was a leap of faith.
Like the first scene, which is John playing on his keyboard. What is that instrument? He made that sort of famous on the Colbert Show, the one that he blows in. It was like he was such a fun-loving. To me, he's like the happiest guy in the world. He's always so funny and so positive. And in your film, it kind of like there's this interesting juxtaposition of John being on stage and having to be John, and then going to see Suleika and having to be feeling this amazing sadness and compassion for her. So what did you observe with John in terms of his how he turns that on? How did you experience that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a couple of things. First, I never wanted to make a music doc. Like I don't know technically what a music doc is per se, but I definitely, for me, this was always a film about two human beings, navigating these incredible highs and lows of life. And so. But
that's not what you embarked on. You embarked on, originally, right, a process film.
Sure, but before we'd even started filming that had changed, mm-hmm. and it kept changing, and we kept adapting to the realities that were put in front of us. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I lost the thread of the original question. So
I was just interested in how a performer like John.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I mean, for me, it's so easy to see somebody who's on TV or see a celebrity or see somebody in the spotlight and think we understand them. I mean, we have an obsession with that in American culture, to think we know these people that are famous or on TV. And I think one of my many goals of this film was to sort of obviously peel back the onion of who this man was. Mm-hmm. And sure, he is on one hand the ebullient, laughing, bright, shining star on the Colbert Show. But there's a lot more depth to that. And hopefully, as you see in the film, that doesn't come easy to him. Mm. That opening scene of him crossing the river and walking along the river, like that wasn't some like staged moment for the film. Mm-hmm. Every New Year's Eve, which is when we started filming in 2021, he goes to New Jersey and he spends a couple of days alone, in this case with a camera, but and meditates and prays and sort of metaphorically fills up his cup for the year to sort of take on what's ahead. It doesn't come easy for him to be in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it was really important for me to peel that back and show, he battles anxiety and depression. He has panic attacks. He's human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for you, in your humanity, what was among the highlights for you? Like, what was the hardest scene to film? And what was your favorite scene to film? What was your experience? Because I know every film you make is a different kind of experience, right? And I'm sure these all weigh deeply on you because your films are so personal. So tell us a little bit about your experience filming with John and Suleika, and also filming the story of a great musician.
Yeah, I mean, I think my dad is in the audience somewhere. I can't see. I think he's over there. He battled cancer for most of my life, and his life was saved at Sloan Kettering. So that felt both quite familiar and quite personal to me. And I guess in some small way, this film is an homage to him. I don't know. I mean, it was a really having made lots of really difficult films. This was, in some ways, the hardest because it just was, from a producing level, every day was sort of just such an unknown. And his life is so crazy. And we had probably on an average dozens of doors shut in front of us every day that we had to figure out how to open. And then on top of that, Suleika getting bone marrow transplant, not having an immune system, a cold could have killed her. And so trying to figure out how to be on the road with John in the crowds and all these different places, and then get in the hospital and film with her. It just was it was a really complicated puzzle to navigate. I think one of the harder scenes, maybe, was the Grammys. We tried for months to get access to film there, and they said no. Anyone in the Grammys, in this audience? Yes? No? Oh. We tried for months to get official permission to film, and they said no, 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 no. And then on the day of, I snuck in as part of John's entourage. And I was wearing like a t-shirt and jeans, and I think I stuck out a bit in that room. And I couldn't bring my normal camera in,
so you had a small camera with you.
I just filmed it on an iPhone. But it felt so disingenuous to have a film that was so personal, and on this like sort of pinnacle moment of his career, to have to cut to the feed. So yeah, and like on that final, when he won Album of the Year, he was sharing a table with John Legend. I like their kids balanced on my lap as I was trying to film John on the thing, and yeah, that was a trip. I think my favorite scene is this dedication that John gives to Suleika. It just, in those 87 seconds, he writes a novella for us. And I think it's so easy in film, especially in documentary film, to just put things on a platter for an audience. And there's no room for interpretation. There's no room to wonder or to question or to let your mind fill in the blanks. And that's what I love about film, narrative or docs, is to let the audience grapple. And as John was grappling in that moment, John was balancing the duality of performing in Carnegie Hall while his wife is in the hospital, potentially dying. Channeling whatever he's channeling into his fingers with his left hand, and then his right hand, breathing. He just literally in those 87 seconds, there's so much unsaid, but more said than any 4-hour interview could have ever done. And that's what so I think that's probably I don't know if my favorite scene, but I think the scene that has the most resonance to me, because it says so much without saying anything.
Yeah, that's such a powerful moment. It's almost like a scripted film, and yet it goes on for longer than a scripted film would have let that go on. And his I don't know what was going on in his mind, but it went far beyond what anybody who was aware of the audience, who would have said to themselves, oh my God, I gotta start playing because everyone's waiting. But clearly he was just deeply into his creative and empathy and his love.
Yeah, and it's definitely a strange choice to sit in silence for 87 seconds, but hopefully it was worth it.
No, he was getting prepared. We could see in his face, like, what film did I just see? I just saw this film, Ferrari, with Adam Driver, and there's this moment where he's trying to make a decision about how to respond to his wife's accusations, and you see his face do kind of the same thing, but that was acting. And this is not acting. This is like a moment. I know you had 13 cameras there. Where were you during the filming?
Well, that was a different performance. That was an improvisational performance called Streams, where he played for 60 minutes, completely improvised, about 6 or 7 songs. And I had worked with this Steadicam operator numerous times. I shot a lot of the film along with 2 amazing DPs, Tony Hardman, Torsten Thilo.
I know Tony.
And but on this, I really wanted to sort of get John accustomed to a Steadicam, because I wanted a Steadicam on the stage for the big performance at Carnegie Hall. So in this scene, when he dedicates the song, it's just like Orlando, who's operating the camera, is there with a headset, and I'm up above talking to him. And having filmed John's hands in his face so many times. I was sort of gently trying to guide him when to pan up, pan down, move around. So yeah.
So it's so interesting about your career that you've done so many different kinds of films, and there's this moment in the film where John starts to talk about unwavering faith, where you may not be able to pull it off, but you have to try. And I'm wondering, with you, all these films that you've done, do you ever have moments where you think, I can't do this? Are there ever moments where you're such a not positive, but confident filmmaker? Are there moments where you just doubt yourself?
Every day, probably. Yeah, I mean, I think fear is a great motivator, and fear of failure, fear of missing something, fear of, I think fear drives me a lot. Mm-hmm. And to not acknowledge that is doing disservice to the creative process. Mm-hmm. I think, I'm terrified. I always, for better or for worse, I view every film as if it's my last. I view every day as if it's my last. I view every scene as if it's my last. Mm. And that's hard on the people around me because I push really hard. And certainly it's hard on those who I'm filming with because we're filming all the time. Yeah. But that's all I know, I guess.
Do you think that John understood what he was getting into with you when he said, yes, you can film me making the symphony?
No. No, I think he. No, there's definitely a bunch of all is lost moments behind the camera where I was like, what are we doing? What is this film? Mm. Suleika didn't sign a release until all the way at the end of the process. Mm. So that whole storyline was a leap of faith. Mm. I was filming in the hospital not knowing whether I'd ever be able to use that footage. I filmed that wedding not knowing whether I'd ever be able to use that footage. Mm. I always envisioned this beautiful love story, and I filmed it, or tried to film it at least, but I never knew whether I'd be able to include it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think, and then yeah, John, I think both of them never really understood the extent of what they were signing up for until a couple weeks in, but also on the other hand, at some point the film just kind of had this momentum that was undeniable on all of our parts, where we all sort of felt like, if we're going to do this, let's do this. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. let's really allow cameras in places where they shouldn't be, at times when they shouldn't be there. And that's, what you see. Yeah.
It's brave on everyone's part. I read that or heard that Suleika, the first time she saw the film, she wanted to view it alone. Can you talk about showing the film to John and Suleika for the first time? Because I imagine they didn't see cuts until it was done. Yeah,
I showed them a couple cuts. I obviously had final cut, but I was curious about what they thought. My North Star generally is trying to find that emotional North Star, that emotional truth that we all seek. But often that comes with, for me, the subjects relating to the story that we told, not thinking that we've manipulated their experience into something. And so it was important to me to get their what they thought. She was, really did not want to watch it, even with John. It was so unbelievably emotional for her, and she didn't remember most of what we filmed, based on the medications that she was on. So it was incredibly hard for her to see. It was incredibly hard for John to see. So, yeah.
Did you watch it with John?
No, I watched. I think I watched the final cut with John, but I didn't watch the first time I showed it to him.
What did Suleika say to you after she saw the film?
Thank you.
Wow, that's almost the best compliment you can get as a filmmaker. Yeah, congratulations on that. So, I want to ask you a little bit about some other parts of your career, which is you made a feature film. You directed a feature film about with Rosamund Pike about a war photographer. And it was very successful. It got lots of great reviews. She was nominated for a Golden Globe. But then you went back to documentaries. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on being a feature filmmaker versus being a documentary filmmaker.
I feel so lucky and honored to be able to do what I do and do what we do. To every couple of years dive into a new pond and swim around and try to understand, the human experience. And I think whether that's in a documentary or a narrative film or whatever form it is, I just want to keep challenging myself. I have no interest in continuing to do the same thing over and over. I love constantly trying to reinvent myself and push myself into uncomfortable places, literally and artistically and figuratively. And a lot of people when they see this film, they're like, why did you make this film? This feels different. I thought you just made films about war zones.
Yeah, where your life is at risk.
And yeah, I want to keep trying to change and evolve.
But actually, when I look at your body of work, like in order, I realize that there are the Cartel Land, which to me was a very extraordinary film, and I actually would like to ask you about that opening scene where they're cooking the what are they cooking?
Meth.
Meth, right? Okay. And then you did The Boy from Medellin, which is leading up to a concert of a young performer who's returning to Medellin for his first time after being away. So that didn't risk your life. So it does seem and you did The Trade, which is about the opioid series. So when I look at your career like that, I realize you do back and forth a lot. I think a lot of us pay attention to films like Retrograde and Cartel Land because they're so stunning that Matt Heineman is there filming that, and what was he thinking? He's in a helicopter that's being shot at in Afghanistan, right? And he's rolling his camera, right? So I think that's why people ask you that a lot. But clearly when I look at your work in order, it is very varied, and you're not risking your life in every film that you make. So I don't know what the question is there, but I do, like your your experience is clearly extremely broad and very different. So what are you doing next?
I mean, I think if there's anything that I've tried to do in my career is taking large, amorphous things, subject matters, things that are plastered across headlines, and trying to humanize them, to try to put a human face to them. Always with a strong central character, always up against some sort of odds, whether it's fighting the cartels in Mexico or ISIS in Syria or, the end of the war in Afghanistan or COVID or cancer or, whatever it is. That's what draws me to these films. In my narrative film, a reporter trying to, report on atrocities across the world. And so, I think that's probably what drives me. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what drives me, but I think it just happens. Yeah, like I don't. All these films, it's the most cliched trope of all time, but I feel like they find me, and I become obsessed in whatever it is.
I love just a moment to tell the audience your backstory, which is you were at Dartmouth. You thought you were going to be a teacher. You were rejected from some sort of teaching program that you applied to, so you and your friends decided to go on the road and figure out what your generation was with a camera, and you actually made a film. And that was your introduction into the life of making a film, and then you went to HBO and you worked with John Hoffman, and you kind of figured out that you were a filmmaker, not having had that as your plan at all. Tell us about the experience, what you discovered in yourself when you were out filming, this question of what is my generation? How did that make you become a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I studied history in college. I got rejected from Teach America. Most people then ask, I didn't know you could get rejected from Teach America. I was one of the lucky ones. I ended up interviewing Wendy Kopp, the founder of Teach America, for my first documentary, and she's like, it must have been a mistake. I was like, no, you rejected me. It's okay. Yeah. But I wouldn't be sitting here if that rejection hadn't happened. So my three best friends and I hatched up this idea to drive around the U.S. and raise money, bought a video camera, and that was my film school. I never went to film school. I never studied a film class. I never read a book. I just learned by doing. And I feel so fortunate to be able to direct and produce and shoot and edit, and that was all based on having no clue what to do other than youthful hubris, thinking I could do everything. But on that trip around the country, I just fell in love with filmmaking, and there's several moments on that trip where I just sort of looked in the mirror and said, "This is absolutely, without question, what I want to do for the rest of my life." And as a 21-year-old, it's a pretty beautiful thing.
It's fantastic. Yes, it's very lucky to discover what you want to do for the rest of your life right out of college. It's a little Ferris Bueller's Day Off to me,
It's been a minute since I've seen that movie, so I can't confirm or deny that.
There's just such freedom in it, just like taking off from college and going on this journey that doesn't have an end, and you don't know what to expect, but you just go because it seems like this is what I want to do. Right. So I think I'm supposed to take some questions or wrap up. Yep. Questions or wrap? Okay, we can take a couple questions. Anybody have questions? Yes.
I'm sure this is true of all of your docs, but you have so much footage. And there are some scenes, obviously, like the one where he's so long, he's sitting waiting to perform what you talked about. But how do you take all that and distill it into this? How do you decide how to do this?
Yeah, it's molding that sculpture out of a massive pile of clay is this film is the hardest of all my. I generally shoot that roughly that much on my films, but this film literally could have in 1,000 different filmmakers' hands. It would have been 1,000 different films. Even in my own experience with this film, like there was probably 100 different films that I experimented with, and. Even up until the final days, we were sort of oscillating. Is this a series? Is this a feature doc? Is this a series? Because our first rough cut was 5 hours, and normally my first rough cuts, I'm like, want to cry and jump out of the building. But this was like a watchable 5 hours, and I think embracing this idea that the film is a love story and making sure that every scene refracted or reflected that idea in some way became the sort of like edit North Star. That scene that we talked about where John pauses was I always find like there's moments in an edit where it sort of defines the DNA of the film. And that was a moment like, yeah, we can say a lot without saying anything, especially with a film with a lot of like beautiful music. Let's embrace that. Let's not always have to be driven by dialogue. I'm not sure I answered your question, but yeah.
Like, what's your approach when you walk into the edit room with 1,500 hours of footage to look at? Do you and your editor sit and look at everything? Do you have an assistant do some notes for you? How do you approach that?
With a deep level of apprehension. I always edit with a team, so we have normally three or four editors. I'm editing myself
Who
too.
you trust?
Yeah, and we sort of divide and conquer. I mean, I had someone who was shooting as well and was there for all the, every frame of shooting. I don't generally rewatch dailies, but I want the other editors to watch. So, generally dividing between different characters or themes. And I always edit what I think are my best scenes first. And essentially, for lack of better, for an oversimplification of the editing process, it's finding those like 10 best scenes and essentially figuring out how to stitch those together. It takes months or years to do that, but like that's generally what I do first, is what are my best scenes that have to be in the movie, and how do we connect them into a story?
Yes.
Hello. You mentioned earlier that you're trying to be more immersive. It's the typical fly-on-the-wall documentary, and I think that comes through perhaps the most in your cinematography. There's often a lot of striking and eye-catching images. And my question for you is, when you're in a perhaps dangerous or emotionally tense situation, whether it's like retrograde, for example, or the more emotional parts of this film, is there a conflict between you as a filmmaker wanting to show these eye-catching, striking images versus perhaps not wanting to distract or mollify the conflicts that you're showing with those images?
I mean, I'm never like shooting thinking like, wow, this is a beautiful image that I'm capturing. I'm just trying to capture what I think is, for me, it's all instinct. And these things are just toys. If you're thinking about aperture, if you're thinking about focus, if you're thinking about framing, if you're thinking about what lens you're on, if you're obsessed with shooting on primes versus zooms, like, you're doing the wrong thing. Like, it should all be, for me, it's just all instinctual. And I'm not really discerning, like, is this a beautiful image or what it is? I'm just trying to capture the essence of what I'm seeing in front of me. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's also in Retrograde and Cartelian and City of Ghosts, there are certainly many, many instances where, as a privileged, white male from New York City, there's a lot of sort of cognitive dissonance happening in my brain. I mean, nothing sort of crescendoed that more than being at the Kabul airport at the end of the war in Afghanistan and seeing thousands of Afghan civilians desperately trying to flee, sitting in a 4-foot sewage ditch, as the Taliban was sitting 100 yards away, watching them at gunpoint, as ISIS was circling around, waiting to attack, which they did 12 hours after I left that place. And I just had tears streaming down my eyes. How the fuck did we get here? How did this happen? So I think I don't know if I'm answering your question. I guess this feels like therapy right now, but so I should probably stop, but yeah.
But these are extremely powerful films, and the fact that you bring them to us to see is phenomenally important. The difference between what you had in your film and the news coverage is night and day, so thank you for that. I did always want to ask you about that opening scene in Cartel Land. In Cartel Land, the opening is the opening of the clip you saw when we did the award, which is Mexican poor, I guess, people who are cooking meth because they need a job and they need to bring money home to their families. How did you you're in the middle of the desert, it looks like. It looks like it's you and these guys cooking meth. How did you get there?
I feel like I've made...
I always wanted to ask you that. That was a truly amazing scene.
I feel like I've lived like 12 lives since then, so I'm trying to remember. I mean, meth was the lifeblood of the cartels. It's what drove that entire conflict. And so capturing that scene with the meth cooks wasn't just like a, ooh, it would be cool to be with the meth cooks and have some sort of cinematic opening.
How did you get there?
Every single day when I was in Michoacan in Mexico where I was filming, I would try, wherever I was, at a cafe, in the back of a truck, you know, driving with guys with guns, whomever I would meet, I would try to ask anyone, who are the people cooking meth? How do I get there? And it was like it was about 9 months into filming, I'd sort of given up on the idea that I could get this scene. And one of the cartel members that I knew called me one day and said, meet me at this town road, and you're in. And we drove to that town and we started, he said, follow us. And we just drove through these towns and smaller towns and villages and smaller villages and eventually out into the middle of nowhere. And obviously, you know, many thoughts going through my head of, is this a setup for him to kidnap me or kill me? But yeah, I mean, that's what you saw, and I, it was ironic. I had spent so many months envisioning the scene, what it could be, and we get out into the middle of the desert, and it's absolutely pitch black. And I don't shoot with lights, so I was like, what do I do? And so I ended up lighting that scene. I couldn't have, you know, we couldn't have seen anything without a light. I was shooting with one hand and lighting with a cell phone on the other hand. So that's what you saw.
Wow, the essence of guerrilla filmmaking. Yes, do I have to wrap up? We have to wrap. I'm
Just-
sorry.
Oh, just a quick thank you for thank you for this film. It's amazing, and I never got a chance to say when we saw First Wave here, what an extraordinarily powerful rendition of what we all went through, but what those people especially went through, and congratulations on that. But don't give up completely on narrative films. I think you might have a couple other in there someday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for being here.
Thank you all so much.